It's going to be fun. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us for the last session of the last day of the conference. I know it's late in the afternoon, and so I just want to thank everybody for coming and looking forward to having a good conversation. We were kind of envisioning this as a pretty informal conversation. So feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We also left a bunch of time at the end for questions and more conversation. But I know we've got a mix of folks in the room. So I'm really hoping that we'll have a lot of lively discussion in the audience. So topic of the presentation: what development can learn from asset management. I figured it would be a good start to just see who we've got in the room. Who do we have on the asset management side? Okay, awesome. Who do we have on the development side? Oh, yes. Thank you guys for coming, and we promise we're going to be really nice and encouraging, and we're not going to be mean. We specifically talked about how we weren't going to be mean and we were going to be supportive. So again, this panel actually grew out of our PAMWG working group, which is our Property and Asset Managers Working Group. It's a group that meets monthly, and we've got asset managers and some property management folks from across the state. We've got a pretty good representation in the metro area, but we've got folks from across the state. It is run and facilitated by the Housing Development Center, and we have a lot of really great conversations in these monthly working groups. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is, what are we seeing in our portfolios that are lessons learned that we can really use to enhance the building of additional affordable housing as we're moving forward. So as we've been having these conversations, and the planning started for the Housing Oregon Conference, we were like, hey, let's do a PAMWG panel that is, us talking about what we like to talk about best, which is, what have we learned from doing asset management? So that was kind of how we got here today. I'm going to do quick introductions for my awesome panelists. I'll start with me. My name is Liz Winchester. I know some of you, I don't know all of you. I am Senior Asset Management Project Manager with the Housing Development Center. I've been doing asset management for about a decade. Prior to working at Housing Development Center, I worked as an owner asset manager for Northwest Housing Alternatives and for Rose CDC. So that was kind of my background coming into this. And I have a master's in real estate development from PSU. So I'm really familiar with that program, which has been really awesome to see a lot of MREDs coming into our industry and to see the kind of overlay of experience that we're getting folks from the development side and the asset management side. And I think there's a lot that we can really learn from each other. So folks on our awesome panel: Natalie Thornton at the end here. Natalie has been in asset management for 6 years. She's an asset manager with Community Partners for Affordable Housing, so SEPA. Prior to that, Natalie worked at Human Solutions. And prior to that, were you? Yeah, okay. Oh, sorry. She holds a bachelor's in sociology from Smith College and a certificate in asset management through NeighborWorks. Brian Shelton Kelly is a portfolio asset manager with Reach. He has 28 years of experience in affordable housing. He is one of our awesome folks who actually started on the development side and then came over to asset management, which is really exciting. We're learning a lot from him. He used to work with NeighborWorks Umpqua and NeighborWorks Alaska. And Holly, I want to just give special kudos to Holly also because she stepped in last minute. You'll notice in our program, Leah Cooper was supposed to join us today. She unfortunately had to step back. So I asked Holly late Tuesday to be like, hey, do you want to be on this panel? It'll be awesome. Holly has 8 years of experience working in affordable housing. She is the interim assistant director of housing at Human Solutions. Director of Asset Management at Human Solutions. And in 2019 completed her master's in public health and has done a lot of work in resident services as well. So she's bringing in that additional lens to asset management, which has been fabulous to learn from her. So thank you, everybody. So we broke this out into 3 sections. We wanted to start with kind of the meatiest topic, which I'm sure folks hear about a lot, which is design and construction. I've been on a couple sessions, been in the audience for a couple sessions during the conference where folks have talked a lot about the timeline for design and construction and how a lot of the decisions around this have to be made really early on in the project. And so when you are bringing maybe property management or asset management into the deal as you're getting closer to lease up, you'll have folks coming in and being like, but why didn't we? And you're like, nope, too late. We can't make those changes. So one of the things that we've been talking about are, what are the points where asset management can come in closer to the beginning of a conversation about a new project, and what are things that have worked really well, and what are things that, hindsight is 2020. We wish that we had done something different. So I'm going to hand it off to you guys and say, what are some examples of design and construction that's worked really well, and what are some recommendations that you would have for development folks who are working on new projects?
Well, I'll start. Thank you, Liz. Again, so Brian and I am one of those rare ones that's going from development to asset management. When I think about this topic, I think the really important thing, and this probably sounds, apparent or like not newsworthy, but the earlier the asset management function can be involved in the design and construction and project development process, the better. From day one, before it's even a concept, engage with us, because chances are we've seen stuff and that. So I think that's just really, really important to keep in mind. I think some of the things I've seen work well are, kind of intentional decisions around using space and building in types of facilities that can really be flexible, have multiple purposes, and are kind of future-proofed for uses and needs that change over time. A lot of us probably remember a while ago when computer labs were, the thing, and every project had a computer lab. We find ourselves 10, 20 years later, those might be less of an amenity in a project. So how can we reuse that space to serve something that's needed now? And I think from the asset and property management hat, if you build a room, it will be filled with something. There will always be something will use that space, even if it's unintended. So, we're starting to think of things like, okay, we don't need a computer lab because most people now have, one of these. What could that space serve? Is there an opportunity to use it for a smaller meeting space, or is it just a storage space that we always seem to be more of? It's like, I don't think I've encountered a project yet where there's enough storage space, and that's one of those things, right? You always tend to need more stuff for maintenance or janitorial or anything. Another thing I'm kind of coming back to is the idea, especially in maybe older properties or middle-aged properties like me, that maybe have larger community spaces, but might have an opportunity to have partitions. Again, it's that flexibility idea. If you have a large space, but maybe an event needs a smaller, more intimate space, there might be some cost-effective or not, capital-intensive interventions that can be done to make that space usable by smaller groups. Things that haven't worked, well, there's probably a lot, and I think my co-panelists will talk about some of those. So, any volunteers? Yeah.
Thank you, Brian, for starting us off. It's funny that you mention that things will fill space where there's available. Something that I've been thinking about is natural areas and invasive species. And we've absolutely seen invasive species like Himalayan blackberry and English ivy fill whatever landscape areas might be available. And you know, as land becomes more scarce, there might be sites that are under consideration for development that are adjacent to urban waterways and other protected areas. And unfortunately, a lot of those are pretty overrun in the Portland metro area, especially with invasive species that can pose operational and financial issues for properties down the line. I was just at one of our sites the other day, meeting with a contractor to discuss mitigation of a major blackberry problem. And the problem at this particular property is quite severe, but it's going to be $50,000 just for the initial treatment. And it's a unique site. It's got an actual wetland and a constructed wetland. And so the scope of the problem is probably a little bit greater than we'll tend to see at other, especially more urban sites. But I know that at SEPA, we are absolutely still developing properties adjacent to these kinds of natural areas. We just leased up a property that's in the Tiger Triangle, a very urban area, but is adjacent to a protected stream, albeit a dry one. So there's absolutely the potential at that site for those invasives to become a problem for the property, even though currently they're kept at bay on the public land. So something that I'd encourage developers to think about is where those natural areas are in relationship to the landscaped areas on your site. What you can do during construction and handoff to mitigate some of these issues. So even if it is a protected area, can you work with the jurisdiction to do some treatment on those invasives to make it a managed problem before you actually do the handoff to property and asset management? Can you make sure that notes about the issue make it into the preventive maintenance plan and annual site checklist for your asset managers and property managers? So it's unfortunately invasives, they're not a problem that's going to go away anytime soon, but there are really concrete steps that we can take as developers and asset managers to make sure that they don't start interfering with our residents' quality of life.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback on a point you brought up, Brian, actually. So regarding the idea of designing for flexibility, something that I thought that I'm actually going to compliment a developer, not to win brownie points, but something that we recently did on we're completing an acquisition rehab right now on one of our existing assets, Ankeny Woods. And something that actually Ryan did, she's in the room, you should wave, Ryan, is add in the capacity so that we could add grab bars into bathrooms in order for an easier conversion to ADA in a few units. So we obviously had to upgrade some of the units to ADA as a part of the rehab, and we wanted to as a part, just within our mission. But we also were able to kind of incorporate some of these smart design decisions now that will allow us to safely upgrade these units in the future to accommodate a variety of users and, potentially increase our ability to provide housing to a community that really needs it. So I thought that was a really great example of future proofing that I wanted to share. And then a few other things that come to mind when I think about development decisions that are made in the development process, and this is a little bit more of my resident services hat, but something that drives me a little bit batty is when I see garden boxes that are so incredibly beautiful on a project, but there's no way to water them, right? And so when we're designing these spaces and these community spaces for our residents, really thinking about, and you guys do think about this, so I guess just going through the practice of like, what does the actual user process look like, or engaging your resident services team in that exercise, I think can be really helpful, because then things come up and you're like, oh, maybe we should provide a watering source so the garden beds don't just sit, with dead plants in them. And then other things too to think about are, how would this space, if it's accessible to the public or the people living at the property? So Human Solutions, I should back up. We do a lot of high bedroom density housing, and our goal, one of our express goals, is to serve households with multiple members, including minors, also known as families. So we've got a lot of little ones that run around the property, whether they should or should not, right? And we have this amazing building, the Rockwood building. It was kind of an anchor project for us. And it's got this kind of ritzy upstairs patio that you can access through the residential unit. And there's a way to go onto a roof portion from the patio, right? And so thinking through, when you're creating some of these resident amenities, I am not advocating that we don't offer resident amenities, but then thinking creatively, like, if we're going to have an upstairs patio, like, how high does that fence need to be to prevent someone from climbing over, right? Because people should not climb over the fence, right? But if a kid climbs over the fence and they fall off the roof of your building, then where are you at, right? So I think trying to think through some of these things, or take into these additional considerations, like if nobody was looking and a 5-year-old broke into this space, what would be the potential outcome? And they were teens who were going on the roof, so whatever. Yeah, so I think that's it. And then something else I want to just touch on is, like, as we're designing resident services spaces, really to Brian's point around designing for flexibility. So you can use room dividers. I'm personally not a fan, actually, but you can go the room divider route, mostly because I had trouble operating them, though. So operator user error. But also thinking about, what does the storage look like in that room? So we usually put, like, there's this little closet, maybe you've got an AV situation closet going on, and then maybe there's some cabinetry, right? But if you have resident services programming and it's active programming and they're doing a variety of things, they're going to need a lot of space to store their stuff. And so depending on what you're envisioning for that kind of activity, you don't want to go light, I would say. You don't want to create space for people to have too much, I guess. But they will offer a variety of programming likely at your building, and you want to make sure that they can actually do that. And then also making sure that there's good space to be able to store things like additional tables and chairs, so that they can actually use the space in different ways. And these are all really basic things, and Human Solutions, I feel like, we have a lot of engagement from our resident services team and social services folks, but we still make these same mistakes on development projects, and recognize that a lot of it is just, there's other factors that play into why decisions are made in development. But those are the kind of few things I want to highlight. Do you have something to add, Natalie? Okay.
I thought I'd talk a little bit about submetering and billing back for water, which is something that Holly and I have worked on together and talked a lot about. And speaking of resident engagement, we found it did not work financially for the properties where billing back for water was happening, and it did not work for the residents. CDCs have enough going on, so I'd encourage you to think really carefully about whether you would also like to become a utility company and a collections company when thinking about billing back for water. And this also came up in conversation with developers recently, so I think it's a relevant topic. We all know that like LIHTC rents are capped. You're not going to collect more than the LIHTC rent by billing back for water. You're very likely going to collect less because of, one, the difference between the utility allowance and actual cost, and two, because of delinquency. And so I can get more into the mechanics of it, but I'll keep it simple at first unless there are any questions. But essentially, the difference between the utility allowance and actual cost for water that residents are using and paying is going to be a financial loss to your property. And if that's $10 or $50, it's going to add up significantly over the months and years and, however many units in your building. And so when thinking about submetering, like as a design choice for preventive maintenance purposes, no qualms, no concerns whatsoever. But in terms of actually taking that information and billing back for water, I would encourage you to think carefully about your organization's capacity and your property management company's capacity to collect. Because we've seen over the past couple of years what significant delinquency has done to our portfolios, and that could be a constant if billing back tenants for utilities. And make sure that you have really good data on actual costs and usage of water. And ideally, you'd get that data from a similar property that is in the same water district. There's a Human Solutions property that is in Gresham. It's one of those funny ones where sometimes it's got the Portland address, sometimes it's got the Gresham address. So it's in the Home Forward's jurisdiction and uses that PHA-UA, but is in the Gresham Water District, where water costs significantly less than it does from Portland Water Bureau. And so that resulted in a huge financial loss to the property because there was a high digit difference between PHA-UA and actual cost. So that is my speech about submetering. Do you have anything to add?
And I'll just add, I think, some of these decisions like at development, right, it probably made sense, but with just what we've seen in terms of ballooning expenses kind of out of control, right, like insurance and everything, it starts to become it starts to matter a lot, that much more. So I think some of these things, at design, you're like, well, this could help motivate the residents to use less water because they're seeing the actual cost in their bill, right? And it can help support energy conservation efforts, water conservation efforts. But there are kind of other things or conditions that maybe are outlying that sort of impact us and make us want to go in a different direction. So.
Thank you, guys. Yes, I wanted to speak about this utility question because it comes up a lot. One thing that actually came up in the presentation that KT did yesterday was we were talking about utility allowance analyses and how they play into rents. And I just want to say for developer folks, because I know oftentimes you're getting these utility allowances told to you by people. Talk to your asset managers. You are, in my experience, far better off hiring a third-party company to do your utility allowance calculation, and especially if you have a green building, using a lower utility allowance based on that calculation than anything that you might want to do with submetering. Based on our experience, do not mess with submetering. Yes. Oh. So the question was, what's the experience with needing to update those utility allowance analyses, and what is the cost of that?
I just did one in Portland, and it looks like a fancy engineer that did it. $200. Worth it.
Totally worth it. And I think, let me know what your experience was, but my experience was we had to do it every 2 years or every 3 years.
We have to do it every year,
Okay.
but there is home. So I don't know.
But still, well worth it when you divide that by the number of units and the number of months. It is a much better way of, especially with new developments. With older developments, it's a little bit different, but with new developments, it's a much better way of trying to get as much savings as possible for the property if you have green features. And so this conversation actually gets us, leads right into kind of the second topic that we wanted to talk about really well, which is legal and financial structure for the properties and financial considerations. So I know folks have been talking about kind of design decisions that were made, the decision to have the property adjacent to wetlands, or the decision to have a natural area on site. One thing that we would say to folks who are, to development folks or to architects or landscape architects who are putting in cool new things into properties, we love them, we do, but please build into your operating pro forma the budget to take care of them. So if you are putting in a natural area, if you are putting in a fancy new HVAC system, make sure that your operating pro forma includes the operating expense to hire a third-party specialist vendor to take care of that natural area or that system. I think sometimes there's this disconnect between the assumptions that are going into the operating expenses per unit per year and the design. And there really is, we see a direct relationship between the features that are at the property, the design of the property, and what's going to be involved with operating expenses. So that's kind of a key thing to start thinking about as you're thinking about legal and or financial and then legal structure questions around setting up a new project. Do you guys want to jump off with any other things that have come up over time? And then I think also specifically to speak to LIHTC and year 15 planning that needs to happen in advance. Oh, we do have a question.
It's particularly important to do that analysis at development and not wait until after lease up, because the change in your allowance is considered in the state of Oregon a part of your out-of-pocket tenant rent. And with all the controls in rent, we don't want that to interfere with your ability to raise rents appropriately. And I do have a question on a different matter from Zoom. The question relates to the resident service folks who always call out kitchens where the stove is impossible to teach a cooking class with.
Is that a question or a statement?
Uh,
Well, I wanted to say something.
yes, it is an issue, a thing.
I just wanted to reiterate the note about having this kind of specialist built into the operating projections on the development side for any special amenity that you have. I just want to make a blanket statement about having an asset manager on your team looking at the entire budget on the development side, like, and weighing in like this number. And I realize there are numbers and thresholds that you have to meet when you put in an application, but it's really important because we at HTC, our asset management team is pretty integrated, or we're working on it being even more integrated into the development side of things, and having our input on, yeah, I see what this number here, but that is completely unrealistic, like in reality. And asset managers are going to be the ones who know that that's the case. So just getting AM feedback for your whole budget, development budget, is really, really advised.
Yeah,
Thanks, KT.
there's a, can you listen?
Oh, well, I'm just wondering, does somebody want to speak to the question about the kitchens before we move on to another question?
Yes. I think also, I used to do cooking classes, no big deal. And I think you can kind of get creative. So the stove may be up against the wall, right? So it's not a great venue to be able to present a cooking class, but there's also the option of having like a single like induction burner or whatever stove burner, and then you can do your demonstration there on like a fold out table. So I think, but in order to do that, you have to be provided that resource. You have to have a spot to store that table. You have to have tables you can move. So it's like a yes and, like there are workarounds, but you need the resources to be able to do it. So, and the cool thing about the individual burners is then it creates space for folks to actually cook their own thing while you're cooking in demo. So just want to throw it out there as an option. But yes.
So my question is following up on the utility allowances. And so heard loud and clear, water, don't do it. But in some jurisdictions, they will not allow us to do a utility allowance calculation and substitute for the jurisdiction's utility allowance. So my question is, in those jurisdictions, do you find that it is better overall for the property to just pay the electric as well, or you still want to sub-meter the electric?
So from my experience, I did a project in Roseburg where we ended up doing that, where the project ended up paying all the utilities. One, because the utility allowance was, I thought it was going to be, more than what a relatively new energy efficient project would pay. This project was also, had a focus on veterans and other people with special needs. And we felt that, that's one more barrier someone might have to, put an electric bill in their name. And so we decided in that particular instance, just have the property pay the bills. And so it probably depends. I think it depends a bit on the population, probably depends a bit on the jurisdiction, the goals of the property, size of property. This project in Roseburg was mostly 1 bedrooms and studios. So we kind of assumed the electric usage would be fairly moderate. So it depends, like so many things. I would have to defer that because I left before. Oh, sorry. I'd have to defer that.
Brian, can you repeat the question?
Oh, the question was, did they pan out to kind of projections? Did the expenses pan out to projections? And I would have to defer that. I actually left Umpqua right as the project was finished, so I don't know how it actually is working out. So far, so good. Okay.
A distinction too between sub-metering for electric, which is standard of course, and sub-metering and billing back for water is that in the case of electricity, the utility will handle the billing and collection, and it's if as the property owner you're choosing to take that on when billing back for water, you're going to have to make some tough decisions about how you want to operationalize that, how you want to handle delinquency, yeah.
Is anyone actually billing back for water? That's done, right? We're not doing that.
Oh, we are billing back for water at Human Solutions.
Oops. Okay. I mean,
We all make
so
choices,
before
Joe.
What's that? I meant it. Before you guys pivot away from design, I feel like you've talked a lot about really specific things, but you've sort of, I'm getting frustrated because you haven't said basically, keep it simple with the systems and the finishes. So I haven't heard that. So I would say keep it simple. With mechanical as much as you can, keep it simple. I can go on for a while, but I see very complicated systems continuously coming into the projects that management is not able to maintain. We're paying the original mechanical company many tens of thousands of dollars to maintain, and it's just not sustainable. And it doesn't work well for the residents.
Thanks, Joe. And Yes, I think that's where my feeling is. If we're going to add in a new or complicated system, we need to make sure that we can pay for it. And we also need to make sure that we can replace parts of it if need be. So I have heard tales of fixtures going in that can only be ordered from Germany and that have a really long lead time. And please don't do that to us. Please make sure that those fixtures are easily orderable and replaceable.
You should go ahead and just name drop, Liz. Just do it.
Nope, just leaving it there. So I'm wondering, do folks want to get more into this
mean-
financial question, or?
Yeah. So, and I think kind of building off of that, one thing that Liz, you're pointing that out as brought to mind for me is, I think there's something of a blind spot in our industry, especially when we're looking at developing our initial pro formas and operating expense projections, right? If we're looking at kind of aggregated data from, across portfolios, those unique features, those special systems might either get washed out or they're coming from, kind of property managers that are looking at kind of big quantities of data, and there's maybe not that nuance or that specialization to say, okay, this is a new special system. It's going to cost more than, the standard out of the box system. And really understanding that. And I think that's really an area that asset managers can and should play a role, right? We can help tease out and kind of fill in that context and that story that may not be coming from property managers, especially if you're using the, like the property management function to inform and come up with the operating pro forma.
SEPA is currently learning from some mistakes that we have made in the past with some of our financial and legal structures. And I think this is a direction that I think the industry's headed in general, but I think it still bears repeating. Specifically, the problem that we're dealing with at a couple properties is really shallow waterfalls. So we have a couple properties that are in the first 15 and are looking at making significant cash flow payments to our investors for the last handful of years that the investor will remain in the partnership. And it's painful and I don't like it. So I think there are a few reasons specific to these waterfalls that this is happening. One, the properties are performing better than was pro forma and are doing so over the course of several years, which is great. And also SEPA's ability to benefit from our hard work in making these properties perform is very limited by the structure that's baked into these waterfalls.
So I'm wondering, do you want to, I know some folks in the room are really familiar with the waterfall and how that works. Do you want to just give a quick rundown if folks aren't as familiar with what the waterfall is and kind of how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just go really basic just because, we don't know who's in the room. So at its simplest, when we build a tax credit property, we have a developer and an investor come together. They create an agreement called a limited partnership agreement, and that governs how every aspect of the partnership functions. And one of the provisions of these agreements is colloquially referred to as cash flow waterfall. So how it functions is, if you imagine a waterfall that's like a series of shelves. The water flows, it fills up one pool. When that pool gets full, it flows down to the next shelf and so on. And some pools will not get touched, and some will have all of the water that they could possibly need. And so, like the investors. And so at the end of every year, we will determine the excess cash flow from the building, which is essentially income minus expenses minus debt service, and run that number through the cash flow waterfall. Are we good? Okay. And if you have too much at the bottom, it all goes to the investor. It doesn't have to, but in a lot of cases, at the end of that waterfall is a provision that the cash flow will be the remaining cash flow, if there is any at the end of the waterfall, will be distributed in accordance with the partner's interest in the partnership. And a lot of the time, the investor is going to have a 99.99% interest in that partnership, which is exactly the second problem that I was going to mention with our shallow waterfalls is we're getting to the bottom. We do not have enough items in the waterfall. They are not robust enough to prevent us from having to run all the way down to that final cash flow provision in the LPA. And so some more reasons for that, we did not maximize sponsor debt. When the property was structured, we did not maximize interest on those sponsor loans, did not maximize developer fee. That is a problem that's a little bit unique to SEPA. We had extraordinarily low deferred developer fee in years past. So there are some ways in which I think, again, as an industry, we've really learned from this issue and are doing our best to maximize cash flow. But I think there are a couple other solutions to this as well that you may not have thought of. So I would recommend doing a sensitivity analysis on your waterfall and include in your sensitivity analysis projections on the property overperforming for multiple years in a row and see what that does to your sponsor loan balance and to your deferred developer fee balance. Yeah, I mean, as a lot of us, our organizations depend on property cash flow, on deferred fee to stay afloat, to continue to serve our residents. So it's important that we, think about how to structure these things.
Yeah. Can I ask a question on that? Maybe. Is that waterfall and cash flow situation you described of concern for your limited partnership agreement and your year 15 exit and the losses that your investor potentially projected such that that could nip you at year 15?
Short answer is yes.
Yeah, so these two particular properties, doing an in-depth year 15 analysis, including consideration of those cash flow payments, is definitely on the list. One of many things on the list. So there are a lot of other considerations with these particular properties, particularly because of the kind of dated provisions around reserves and distributing reserves to the investor upon exit. So it's going to be a kind of complicated consideration of whether or not to propose an early exit to avoid some of those issues that you're referencing because of that simultaneous reserve issue. Does that make sense?
I was just going to add, if the development function has the limited capacity to do those kind of stress tests or sensitivity analysis, invite your asset manager to do that. I mean, in a way, that's how we understand and get to know these deals. So again, if we're doing that up front, we can kind of get a sense of what this deal is going to look like from our perspective. When I was a developer, I really understood one of the main ways I looked at the deal was sources and uses. Does it balance? Is there a gap? What's the debt carrying capacity? The waterfall was important, but for some ways as a developer, it was secondary for me, right? I was looking at, can I deliver this project on time and to budget, get our developer fee, and then go on to the next project? Now that I'm in asset management, it's really about what is that waterfall? How is this structured? What are we looking at? How do we get to zero in that last priority payment so we don't have to write a check, for 99.99% of the cash to an investor who really doesn't want the cash because they have to pay taxes on that cash. And then it also, it throws year 15 and it just has all kinds of chaos.
And just building on that, Brian, there's a lot of creative things that we can do as we're closing out the development process. where there's a lot more flexibility about infusing reserves and socking money away, deferring developer fees such that we enhance that waterfall without constraining stabilized operations. So again, talk to your asset manager. There's lots of options that we have.
So my question is just around this. It sounds to me like there are multiple periods of analysis. One at development for this specific cause, but then when are the other periods? You know, is it at year 12? Is it, you know, when?
I can answer that question. So I would say that this is on. You're going to look at it every year for an active tax credit partnership or tax credit deal in those first 15 years, or if it's an early exit, those first 10 or 11 years. So you're going to look at it every year with your audit. You'll have an audit done of the property. Your auditor will likely produce a report for you that runs the cash flow analysis, or maybe not. I don't know. We do it because it's nice to have it done for you. And then you'll track your capital account on your spreadsheet every year. So it's a part of it's kind of like an annual review thing. And then as you get further along in the process, you can kind of start to see what's happening in that capital account and start to think, you know, is this a good candidate for an early exit? And then you look at your LPA, you know, so I'd say an annual thing, but maybe.
Yeah, I'd agree with all that. For me personally, I really like to look at kind of the end of the third year of stabilized operations. For me, that you know, gives the property enough time to kind of season, get through its lease up period, get through its first, you know, year or two of learning how this thing functions and works and what it's going to do. And so, yeah, for me, in my experience, kind of by the end of year 3, some of those things have been figured out, and for me, I can get a better sense of how it's going to last, you know, or work for the next 5, you know, 10 or so years, kind of looking at that.
I was just going to add quickly, just for anyone that might not be aware, the capital account is not a bank account. It's a tax treatment.
Thanks, Natalie. The other thing I was going to say is, if you want to kind of make sure that any fees that are owed to you, the GP in the deal, can accrue year to year. So I've seen it go both ways in LPAs. They don't always accrue, but we want those things to accrue because we want them to stay on the books so we can record them on the books, even if we're not going to get paid. So if we have a, you know, banner year or a big year one year, we don't miss out on those payments. So.
Just a comment. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you did say that. Sorry. Kimberly Taylor, Housing Development Center. Just a quick comment. Developers in the room, you probably already know this, but just in case you don't, the waterfall is absolutely a negotiating piece. Don't just accept. Sorry if there are investors in the room, but I used to be on the investor side, so I feel okay saying this. Like you can absolutely push back on the waterfall that's presented to you in your draft LPA. So work with asset management on what would look better, how would it be better for the operations of the project. Don't just take it as as it is. Like, push back and negotiate.
I just want to add one more comment. Having Maggie Johnson, I'm at NOAA. I just wanted to make one additional comment to what Kimberly said. Having been at a few different institutions, make sure everybody's waterfall aligns between your equity investor, your term lender, and your public funds going in.
Maggie, I have never had that come up, and that sounds terrifying to have that. But oh my gosh, I'm going to make sure. So panelists, I was looking at the time. I'm wondering, do we want to move into talking about how development can work with asset management? Kind of what have been good strategies that you've seen? I know I want to just follow up on the comment over there. When you're bringing in asset management to work with you on a new development project, you are not just bringing them in once. The development project is taking place over multiple years, and I think you're bringing them in at multiple points during that project. So you're bringing them in when the concept is coming together. They will probably be able to give you feedback on the market. If it's a market that you've worked in before, they'll be able to give you a feedback on the preferred population for that project. If it's one that you've worked with before, you're bringing them in actually periodically throughout the development process. So I want to continue pushing that point, that there should be multiple points where asset management can be really helpful during that development process. But, panelists?
Sorry, Liz, I want to take us back to talking about financial structuring just really quick. I want to, we would not be good asset managers if we did not harp on expenses and expense inflation. So I want to echo what KT said a few minutes ago about having your asset manager really thoroughly review your pro forma. And something that you can do is have your own organizational pro forma where you inflate individual expenses more in line with the way that they're actually increasing, like 10% or in some cases more year-over-year increases for insurance premiums. 3% increases for water is not enough. There are lots of water districts that are catching up after years and years of not increasing their rates. That sort of thing. Unfortunately, I had to tell our development director that she could not pro forma a new family property at $5,600 a year per unit, $5,600 per unit per year in expenses for a new construction family property. I'm sorry, but no.
Yeah, so best practices. I think, reflecting back on my experience, again, early and often is best. I think in particular, the value engineering process is an area where developers and asset managers can really be real partners and really work together to figure out, what are the trade-offs, because we know we're going to make trade-offs, right? That's just part of the game. But really understanding what those trade-off decisions mean long-term for the project, which is really where asset management can lend its expertise and perspective, and also, kind of really say, yeah, this is something we really need to stress getting in development now, because we know, there's never going to be enough reserves. There's never going to be enough opportunity to recapitalize to get some of these major building systems done down the road. So I think value engineering is an area where teams can work, the disciplines can really work closely together. Yeah.
At Argis Future, formerly Human Solutions, we have a pretty small shop or group of us in the housing team. So we do have the benefit of being able to work really closely together, but just really echoing what Natalie and Brian have brought up, it really is important from the beginning that the groups are kind of working in lockstep, even when you're starting to apply for funding or financing resources, and you're thinking, all right, well, we're gonna get a little home in there and maybe some OHTCs, and okay, we'll do PBVs, PHB, you called. So I think and it's because it's what makes the project go, but what asset management can say is, wow, that's a lot of layers of different kinds of subsidy, but maybe we could just make sure all the set-asides match, how can we, and I think that's where the benefit of bringing asset management in early on is we can help support some of that thinking of what is going to happen operationally down the road? You know, how are we going to keep track of this in 10 years when we may not be at this organization anymore? And so really thinking about how we can kind of like plan a better future. And I think what I want to just offer for best practices is I feel like, you know, we make jokes about asset managers complaining to developers all the time, like, why'd you give me this dumpster fire? And developers are like, you should be grateful. There was only $10 million of subsidy in that award and we got all of it, you know, or whatever. And I think the cool thing about like these two groups of people is together we have the power to influence the structures and the entities that are awarding these funds to really create a realistic picture of what we actually need resource-wise to build sustainable housing in Oregon, right? To actually build PSH housing that has decent soundproofing, you know? I mean, or not even just PSH housing that needs it, but I think you guys get kind of where I'm going with this. I think there's kind of a lot of strength in that kind of co-working. And we've seen some of the examples of us coming together with the preservation funds that have kind of come through from OHCS in this year, in this first iteration. But there's a lot of shared expertise. And I think, you know, just I really want to stress that when I hear from you guys, like, or from developers, like, oh, well, we had to do it, you know, and it was the only way to get it done. And we all want to provide high quality housing. So, you know, we can kind of, when you guys have to do things, I would say, reach out to us and be like, track this, track what happens, because we had to do it. They made us do it. And we can start to hold these entities accountable for making us make these decisions. So that's my emphasis.
Thank you, Holly. I agree that with asset managers and developers working together, we can make our work so much more effective and ultimately do what our shared mission is to do, which is to build beautiful and safe and healthy, high quality housing for our residents. So some of the practices that we've been putting in place at SEPA to kind of break down some of those silos and share knowledge are things like I put together a lessons learned presentation from our portfolio, much like the three of us are doing today, for our development team. I've been cross-training members of our development team on asset management procedures and best practices. And we've been working together to create benchmarks for our new developments based on what we've seen work in our portfolio. I've also been getting involved in preservation projects like Holly mentioned. I think she's doing the same. I know that all of the work that I have done in development has paid off in spades for my work in asset management. And it makes my work more fun and more interesting and more effective. I also want to add, kind of echoing some of what Liz said at the beginning, that the intention of this session was very much to be positive and to share knowledge. Something that I really appreciate about our industry and our region is this continuous improvement and knowledge sharing culture that we have. And so I hope that all of this came off with the intention with which it was given, which is to start creating a knowledge collective and make our shared work more effective.
My final ask is, if you put together a deal, then you should also put together like the deal book, or however your organization tracks all the information associated with the deal, because you guys know all those things off the top of your head, and there are a lot of files that get saved during development projects. So I know this isn't very collaborative of me, but this is my ask. You guys put together those like workbooks, or what do you call them, KT? Okay, compliance charts. Yeah, it would be great if you guys did those. Because you know what the final documents are.
Right.
I don't know.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Maggie.
Again.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to kind of ping off something that Natalie said about the rising cost of water and kind of bring that back to the sub-metering issue. I haven't developed for a while, so I don't know what sub-metering is costing, but as water approaches the price of oil, per gallon and projected to keep going up with the drought. Sometimes submetering gives you an ability to help your residents control water usage, and it also gives you a way to give them a bonus if they cut down on their unit usage. So during COVID, large family unit properties, their water has tripled with the stay-at-home policies, and it's talk about water going up at outrageous amounts. It should be considered on the front end.
Yeah, that's a good point, Maggie, and the rising cost of water as it relates to billing back for water is something that I hadn't considered, so I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's one of those things like installing submeters at construction, and then doing a continual data analysis to determine the difference between actual cost and the utility allowance. That really goes back to what Brian was saying about future-proofing, designing for flexibility, and there are certainly other benefits to installing submeters at construction as well.
Just kind of a comment on this topic. Brandon Brezik with Central City Concern. We, for the majority of our properties, we include utilities in our rents. We don't use utility allowances. It just covers everything, makes it easier, especially for our permanent supportive housing, like Brian, which you mentioned, single units and studios and SROs. But we do have a few family properties where we are billing back utilities, and we do see an impact of reduced water usage, definitely. But with the headaches that billing back water can lead to, I think a different approach that we're taking is just resident education for just sustainability in general, water, electricity, all the above, especially on properties that have like solar, other energy efficiency mechanisms, just really engaging residents on why these systems are in place, how they can be, a benefit, whether, it helps the budget as well as helps, educate people on how they're impacting the environment. The other thing is just like design components, metered faucets, infrared faucets, showers as well. We have metered showers because we, in our SROs, common showers, or we have. So anything we can do to, cut back on people just leaving sinks running. That also helps with flood issues. We have floor drains in a lot of our units or in common bathrooms. So just different things that we've kind of baked into our design to help cut back with water usage and energy usage.
Yeah, I think that something that's been brought up a couple times is yes, having submetering for water, it can give residents more control and more information about the water that they're using. And the residents that you have in your property who become delinquent can sometimes make it more of a headache than the benefit that you're getting. And it's going to vary from property to property, but I think that's been my experience. That's been the experience of a lot of folks that I know I've talked with. I know Natalie had mentioned that. One thing I wanted to bring up around that, I had worked on a program where it was a resident education program about water usage, and we got more benefit from doing regular events where we were communicating the usage of the property to residents, and we told them, if we can get the water usage down to this, you all get gift cards. That actually worked really, really well. So there are some ways that you can think outside the box, and but I think it's interesting that there is no right answer. And it is really going to depend on the property. But if you tweak something over here, you might have another issue over there.
I'd also like to just complicate some of these ideas about, pushing residents to conserve. Not that I disagree on principle, but I think a lot of low-income people are very, very, very used to conserving in a variety of ways. Conserving their limited financial resources, keeping the heat down low so as not to raise their electricity bills. We have a lot of residents that have declined free air conditioning units despite living in mid-rise southern-facing units because they simply cannot afford the impact of their electricity bill. So I think on one hand, I'm very much in support of any sort of conservation, and sustainability is, I think, a really important core tenet of the work that we do. And also, I think we need to keep in mind that sustainability is not the primary, the onus does not primarily lie with low-income people.
We're starting to look at some of the kind of emerging technologies around kind of water sensors and kind of other things that we might be able to put in units to help us have a better understanding of what's happening. Where, you know, one of the things that is always vexing to us is when toilets start running. And I think one of the things we really learned in COVID was when we weren't going into units regularly to do unit inspections, we started missing that feedback loop that had previously allowed us to catch things like a leaky faucet, like a running toilet. And, you know, it only takes a couple toilets running to have that water bill just spike up. And, you know, it's an easy fix, but someone has to go in there. So, you know, we're starting to think of, is something like a sensor something that would benefit us? You know, could it be actually less intrusive to a resident instead of doing a unit inspection or going in? You know, if we had a sensor that's you know, telling us, hey, you know, this toilet's running, or there's unusual water consumption at this you know, at this junction. So we haven't made any decisions. We're somewhat like, we're trying to determine, is the technology too good to be true, or is it really a thing? And we haven't made a determination yet, but it is something we're looking at.
So I just wanted to give folks notice. I'm noticing that we've got about 20 minutes left in this session. So if you have questions, I'm going to be handing this around. And then I think once we're done with questions, I'm just going to send it back to you guys if you have any final comments for the group. So that's how I'm envisioning the rest of this to go.
Brian Travis, Housing Development Center. Wondering, the sensors that you're talking about, are those sensors that are in the plumbing line or the plumbing fixture that measure water flow, or is it a sensor that measures a leak, or that detects a you know, like water on the floor, a flood?
So there's both. There's both products. And we're looking at it both from usage, but also leak detection, because that's another thing that's, you know, really leaks are killer. Yeah.
So I would add a lesson learned that if the sensors that you're using are an alarm type that detects when there's a flood or water on the floor, great that it notifies property management or maintenance or owner. Great that it gives an audible alarm to alert the resident that there's an issue. Even better if you've done robust tenant education so that the resident doesn't freak out and try to take a hammer to break the sensor and instead destroy their bathroom.
Hi, James Lee with CDP. I had a question around solar panels. You know, they've been around for a while, but there's a lot of resources coming out that may make it even more feasible to add them to projects moving forward. Is there a consensus, you know, as the developer, I want to try and put them on all the projects that I can, but is there a consensus on the asset management side? Do they work? Do they actually perform the way that they're modeled over time on projects?
I can't say for sure whether each of our properties that has solar panels have performed as modeled, because I haven't looked into that in depth. I do know that on the two most recent projects that we've developed that are mid-rise single building apartment style, they did not quite perform as modeled. And I would say that I haven't seen, so the setups that we have only have the solar panels offsetting the house meter. I'm not sure that we would be able to offset tenant electric bills. And I have not seen the solar array fully offset the electric costs of the house meter in this style of building. Again, the mid-rise single building apartment style.
Yeah, that would be my experience too. The only other thing I'd add is if you are doing solar panels on the roof, please put a hose spigot up there so we can have water access to actually clean them, and not have to daisy chain hoses from the ground floor and some crazy arrangement. I think my other experience, solar hot water hasn't really panned out, at least on the projects I've seen. Solar hot water. But solar PV is I think what, like Natalie said, it's close, but maybe not full. Still like them. I mean, they're great, but I don't know.
Yeah, and one thing that I wanted to add, again, I feel like a broken record with this, please build into your operating expenses the cost to have a third-party person come in and maintain them. Because I just had a project recently where property management was like, so what about the solar panels on the roof? And we were like, there's solar panels on the roof. Are they working? And they were like, I don't know. And so, yeah, it was just one of those, like, it was a really great idea. But then because we didn't build in the annual maintenance as part of that preventative maintenance plan, everybody lost track.
Hi, Kimberly, HTC. I promise it's a question this time. I'm hoping that one or all of you could speak to the pros and cons of having a central fire sprinkler system. Do any of you, can you guys, I mean, obviously I'm wanting to hear more about the cons, but just curious.
Well, on Monday, we had a small fire in one of our units in one of our high rises, and smoke damage was minimal, fire damage was minimal, no one was hurt, thank goodness. But 17 units got flooded out when the sprinkler system went off, and flooded the floor it was on, and then the floor below, and the common room, and the office, and everything else. And so now we have a mitigation company in there, and we're probably spending $2,000-3,000 a day just for their drying equipment to sit there to try to dry it out. So there's a con.
I'll say I'm not terribly educated on those kinds of systems. Don't know a lot about how they work, but I think on the properties that do have them in our portfolio, I don't think that the pro forma accurately reflected the expense to maintain them. It's in the thousands a year, every year. And then, of course, you've got a larger set of preventive maintenance tasks that need to be done every 3 to 5 years, and that's several $1,000s.
Ryan with REACH, formerly of Human Solutions, so I know this whole gang of folks here. And I guess a kind of a example that I think is a really good opportunity to explain something that Holly and I discovered together, which she may have known, and I discovered the hard way. I know, you'll remember this. And then a question. So, to the point that there's a lot of funder requirements that require things in development, sometimes it's opportunities, sometimes challenges. We had a project that had some very aggressive energy targets compelled by a public funder, and we were excited to do them, but saw an opportunity to do modeled utility allowances because this was going to be an ultra energy efficient building, super water efficient. And we discovered, unfortunately, pretty late in the game, which is something that had I asked, I probably would have figured out, that when there are project-based vouchers commingled in a singular building, you must use the standard PHA utility allowances for all units. Yes, so Holly's nodding along that like she knew that. It cost us $500,000 in loan proceeds pretty late in the game when we figured that out. So that's a really good example. It's going to be okay. We fixed it. We fixed it. But like, would that have led us to do multiple buildings and co-locate those PBVs? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, like that's counter to maybe some other, goals. Would that have led us to not accept the PBVs? Probably not. But like, it would have been interesting to know that upfront and have that be part of our initial decision making because it was kind of a surprise. So that might have been glaringly apparent to everybody else, but I did not realize that.
I was just going to add, James, CDP, we actually have gotten guidance from HUD in both ways. So we've gotten some guidance that you do have to match those utility allowances, and we've gotten guidance that you do not. So I would ask your office, and if you don't get the answer you want, maybe ask around. I don't.
Yeah, that's a really, James, right? Yes. That's a really good point, James. And I think it just depends on the entity, like where that subsidy is coming from. So are these coming from Home Forward? Are they coming directly from HUD? What's the detail, what's the dirt in that contract say? I would say.
What's the compliance dirt?
Yeah.
And the other question I have is to asset managers. Another thing that's oftentimes compelled by jurisdictions is mixed use properties, active ground floor stuff. I know, and I heard Natalie say, loud and clear that the goal is to provide affordable housing for people, and sometimes that gets complicated when we have a site that has a mixed use project requirement. So any thoughts on that?
You are a small community development CDC. If you're a small CDC, a smaller CDC, or if you're a large CDC, becoming also responsible for keeping a space leased, a ground floor commercial space leased that may not have a traditional setup. I'm speaking from experience with the Rockwood MSC. Can become very, very challenging after the first 10 years if tenants decide to leave. And because it's still new construction, the lease rates you have to charge are usually pretty high. And so if you think about, it's like fantasy, right? Like you want to commingle services and housing. And that's what I want to see more of is like my public health brain. I'm like, let's bring it all together. But then like how many service providers can pay Class B rent on a commercial space realistically and stay in business? Not many, like maybe a qualified, like a federally qualified health center or whatever, but maybe not many others. So I think that's just my one thing. So maybe sell it, make sure someone's buying that condo.
There you go.
Yeah, big time sell that thing. This is one of those areas where, the advice from your asset manager and the realities of developing property in 2022 are going to conflict. Looking at James about that Beaverton bond site. They want that active ground floor, but of course there are no subsidies from the city mentioned in order to lower the rents. So I don't know what it's going to be, 23 per square foot per year. Who's going to pay that? So I agree with Holly. If it is at all possible to sell that ground floor commercial, that is what I would recommend. And I would think about, on your internal pro forma, look at 100% vacancy. See what that does for you and your organization. There was one more thing I was going to say, but I forget.
Agree with all that. If you have to do it and it has to be there and it has to be a rental, I recommend really thinking about the uses and how those uses of that commercial space are going to work or not with the residential. So for example, we have a property that has a wood-fired pizza restaurant on the ground floor. It's great. It's a great neighborhood amenity, works well in the location, restaurant's doing great. Every morning when they fire up their wood-burning oven, because of where their smokestack is and our air intake unit, we have 2 floors of the building that smell like a campfire. And short of a very expensive HVAC retrofit, there's not much we can do.
I would think carefully too about expensive TIs for specialty tenants, especially if they tend to be government funded, like No one wants to rent a 3,000 square foot commercial space for $19 per square foot per year that has tiny toilets for tiny humans because it used to be a Head Start.
It's Head Start again, folks. They came back. So let's. They couldn't stay away that long. I guess my only other comment on that is when you're doing mixed use, think about trash because you don't know what kind of tenant's going in there and you probably don't have enough spaces for multiple trash cans to keep it actually separate. So you don't really know. And that was a little bit of an issue. So it's time for us to wrap up. We've got the signal from Liz. So I kind of gave closing statement 20 minutes ago. So I think I'm just going to say it's great getting to work with developers. Reach out to your asset management folks early and often. We may seem grouchy and tired, but it's just, we can be fun too. So don't worry. We can be fun and fancy just like you guys. Yeah, thank you for coming. And it's really great to see you guys take an interest in this work. I think that's really always special. So.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. We're a partner, want to be the partner, want to work with you to advance all our collective missions and agendas.
Thank you, everyone. And I kind of gave my spiel about the intent of this session earlier, so I'll leave it there and just thank you all for coming.
Thank you to our fantastic panelists for coming to speak today. And thank you for thinking a lot about the messaging that you wanted to send out and also getting out your frustrations before the panel so that way you could come in with smiles on your faces. I do want to say kind of to everybody here, it is important to bring your asset management into your development conversations early and often. We are here. We are, I think, interested. Every asset manager, I think, is really interested in being able to be helpful and to participate and to make sure that these properties are going to be set up really well for many years to come. I also just want to mention that we've got a lot of new folks coming into the industry right now. And so you may have asset managers on your team or developers on your team who are kind of new to the industry and who, when you're like, hey, should we do submetering? They're like, I don't know, I've never seen it before. Use your community. So PAMWG, Property and Asset Management Working Group, we meet the second Wednesday of every month. We meet virtually. I have flyers up here if folks are interested in taking them. There is a really active group of asset managers throughout Oregon. If you are looking for operating expense comps, if you are looking for just to ask, has anybody ever done this before? Send a question over to our group. We will find somebody who can hopefully talk to you about it if anybody has that information, and we are happy to share. So not only include asset management from your own organizations if you have them, but there are asset managers kind of throughout Oregon who are really happy to lend any expertise and answer any questions that folks have. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for staying. Take care.